at rapid NCSC CAF compliance, deploying enterprise PAM in days with Silverfort. So just want to cover off the agenda for the session. It's a 20-minute session, so be relatively rapid, but I'd like to do some introductions first. My name is Peter Batchelor. I head up the government and public sector team at Silverfort, and I'd also like to introduce Elliott.
Hi there, I'm Elliott Morgan. I work for Trustmarque. Trustmarque have been supporting the public sector for almost 40 years now, across a whole host of things around cloud, data, infrastructure, network, modern workplace, and predominantly for me, cybersecurity. So I've been at Trustmarque for 5 years now. I'm the cyber lead for the NHS and regional services. So everything from hospitals, central government departments, schools, universities, local councils.
Fantastic. Thank you, Elliott. The structure of the presentation is fairly simple. We're just going to look at the structure and the requirement around CAF for the public sector, focusing on the identity element of that, looking at the Silverfort platform and how we help organisations deploy identity controls to comply with CAF fundamentally. Hopefully we'll go through it, and myself and Elliott will sort of have a two-way conversation to make it more interesting. So I guess there's 4 or 5 core objectives for the CAF framework that is being deployed based upon what sort of public sector organisation you are. But these are all focused around improving cyber resilience and echo a number of other regulatory requirements that have been out in the market for a number of years, such as NIS2. And I think the focus, well, there's a big focus around identity, and there's a good reason for that. We've seen over the past couple of years identity-based attacks, which have caused significant disruption to patient and public services. And they're often focused around lateral movement, credential theft, and abuse of service accounts. And I guess, Elliott, from your perspective, Trustmarque involved in dealing with the public sector every day. What have you seen?
Yeah, particularly in the past 12 months, there's been a number of somewhat high profile and some that haven't necessarily made the news, where there's been attacks, and I think it's predominantly successful attacks that we've seen through things like supply chain, contractor identities, etc., where fundamentally, had MFA been there, the attack either wouldn't have happened, or it had significantly delayed the attacker from being able to make progress in terms of their own objectives. MFA is absolutely fundamental, and having MFA everywhere is a phenomenal way to improve your cyber resilience. It's just a shame that I think there are complexities and traditional ways of trying to solve MFA everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what we see as well. I mean, the majority of organisations contacting us in the public sector are looking at extending MFA or putting MFA everywhere because there's a big gap. But there's also a tendency, I think, where people look at investing in technology for identity controls is to go straight towards a traditional PAM solution, where the focus historically has been around recording sessions, rotating passwords, vaulting passwords. And whilst this historically has been used for or by large banks, there are some challenges in deploying PAM solutions or traditional PAM solutions, which we can see there. And again, Elliott, I'd love to know or get your view on what you've seen from public sector organisations that you've witnessed trying to deliver big PAM projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just touching on what we previously said there, a lot of these successful attacks are coming through things like supply chain, through service accounts, through unmanaged accounts, password rotations not being done, passwords being stored on Excel spreadsheets, etc. PAM is a fantastic way of gaining back some control over that. But as you've rightly point out, I think a lot of the main challenges come when PAM seems like such a good idea, and then you start to see the scale of cost, I think, is predominantly the main issue. I work with a number of large organizations in the public sector, 1,000+ servers, it comes down to then either they have PAM on some, which ultimately leaves gaps on others, predominantly because of cost, not being able to deploy across your entire estate, not being able to deploy across your entire supplier base, for example. And that then requires having to try and be really pragmatic about who you're covering and what they have access to, undertaking quite rigorous risk-based assessments on what could be the impact if this particular supplier was compromised, etc. So yes, I think they're a necessary. It's a necessity. PAM is a requirement to reducing cyber risk. But ultimately, I think the way that the market exists at the moment is it becomes very cost prohibitive to do that across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is what we've seen time and time again, is that the OpEx cost, which is the bane of everyone in public sector, trying to budget year in, year out, as potentially they don't know what budget they're going to have the following year, just grows with traditional PAM. It's not cheap. You have to pay people to deploy and manage it. Those skills are expensive and ongoing. And your monthly cloud consumption bill will go up and up and up because of, if you're recording every session, that's not cheap. But also from a security sort of analogy, where often we see with PAM projects, it's like sort of paying for an expensive gym membership that you never use or don't get value from, is that you're paying for it month in, month out, but not really seeing any value. Um, and as one analogy I've sort of seen a time and time again, where organizations are looking at PAM, going through the process of trying to gather their requirements, getting costs from traditional PAM vendors, and then simply not getting the funding because it's not financially achievable. Um, so I think this is the segue where I just give a very high level view of where Silverfort comes in to plug in this gap. Now, the Silverfort platform has a number of areas that we provide to deliver identity controls, um, which you can see along the top there. But the two areas that I would really call out is this universal MFA and this non-human identity controls that we can put in place. Because of the way we're built and what we do, we allow you to put MFA everywhere. A very quick win. And alongside that, and we see this more and more, that people are realizing that service accounts, the lack of visibility and protection that people can put around them, if that's not in place, then that just creates potential lateral movement opportunity for any attacker. I don't know whether any of those elements that you've seen relevant, Elliott, from your
Yeah,
customer.
100%. And how is this achieved? Do you require agents to achieve any of this, or do you have another way of achieving that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, right? And historically, our mantra has been we extend cloud identity controls or modern identity controls to on-prem environments. So to answer your question, is that 7 years ago, when we were founded, Microsoft were our initial investor, and our team still sit very closely with the Entra and Active Directory development teams there. And what this has allowed us to do is to create this very simple but effective architecture where we can deploy into without the need to put agents on any endpoints or use any proxies, and allow people to extend MFA to anybody as long as it's authenticating to Active Directory. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think one of the other areas, that people are always asking is that, am I buying another MFA token? Like, am I having to use a Silverfort token when on my deployments? And yes, you can use a Silverfort token, but we see and I guess your comment on this, Elliot, will be interesting as well. Is that public sector Microsoft are quite pervasive in that environment, and more often than not, we're extending those Microsoft authenticators, or sorry, the Microsoft authenticator, and integrating into that Microsoft existing environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, we've talked about this quite a lot. I know this is a security issue, but cost factors are such a big thing. So being able to simplify management, consolidating around a single stack and finding technologies, and like you rightly call out, Microsoft is one of those areas where many public sector customers are starting to rationalize, understand, are we getting value from it? Stop. They're looking less and less at third parties and looking more at what can they do with the licensing they've got. And obviously, as pervasive as Microsoft is, they don't cover everything. There are always gaps. There are areas that they may not be particularly strong or they may not cover. And I think this is a perfect example of where this is a really strong complementary technology to a Microsoft solution.
Yeah, no, and I think that, I mean, that's partly why we're partnering together, right? Because we recognise Trustmarque's um, Microsoft background, pedigree, and skills, and market presence in that area within public sector, and so we are just, a very good fit for our partnership, extending already your, I guess, your services and skills out, plugging those gaps.
Match made in heaven.
Indeed, indeed. I, I mean, and going back to our, our platform, right? The MFA is driving a lot of our conversations around CAF, around public sector. But because we are seeing all the authentications, remember, if it authenticates to Active Directory, we can see it and protect it. Is that there are other things that we can do? Um, so very quickly, you can again address that third party access control by providing least privilege or just in time access to third parties very quickly without having to export identities to a third party platform. Again, called out within the CAF. Um, we can then, and again, because we're seeing authentications, we understand, and our machine learning behavior analysis looks at human authentications, but we also understand that service accounts authenticate metronomically. 9 a.m. in the morning, 5 p.m. in the evening, 9 a.m. in the morning, 5 p.m. in the evening. So very quickly, you're getting value from the MFA, but you're getting additional value by getting control of those non-human identities sitting within your environment. And that's simply how the product works. Very simple architecture, very quick to deploy and get value from. Um, I guess just one other question for you, Elliot. We talked about a lot about MFA. Are you seeing the service account problem being
Yeah,
talked about in public sector?
I not talked about necessarily, but it's come up. It comes up fairly regularly, particularly when we're doing AD audits, as part of the penetration testing practice
Yeah,
within Trustmarque. We have seen service accounts that are either have become unmanaged, they've not gone through any kind of password reset in a significant time. So we know that these accounts are usually loaded with privileges.
yeah,
They're not operating under least privilege. The accounts aren't, as again, the passwords aren't being rotated. These are particularly worrisome as well when it starts coming down to service accounts that a supplier would have had access to and the password that they were given at the time hasn't been changed.
yeah,
We're leaving lingering passwords there that if for whatever reason they were compromised or God forbid had become decided to become a malicious actor, they've got a foothold in your network through just poor practice on password hygiene.
yeah. No, agreed. Absolutely. So I'm conscious of time. I think we've got about sort of 3 or 4 minutes left. So just bringing it back together from the problem, the service and platform that Trustmarque and Silverfort provide. These are the key elements where we map to that CAF requirement, and there's a lot more detail that we can provide, and there's a link in the next slide on it. Um, but in tandem with Trustmarque, one of the things that you can um, engage us on very quickly and at initial no cost is this trial where we can put a platform in. Takes a couple of hours generally to deploy, and suddenly get visibility of all your users authenticating, human and non-human, to Active Directory. Understand who's got privileges to what, and where your risks are, and then start testing the MFA function and the service account function, and potentially the privileged access security function within Silverfort. And then if you're happy with that, that can be very simply translated or transitioned into a production rollout. It's a very simple route to trialing Silverfort through Trustmarque. Lots of experience. And then just the last piece, and I know that we talk about this a lot within public sector. We've created a pricing model with Trustmarque that addresses CAF, that hopefully reduces any OPEX costs. And then we work very hand in glove with Trustmarque around the procurement of that and the current frameworks they won't work on. Just on Elliott, on your perspective, you do a lot of government procurement, far more than me. What's your experience
Oh,
of that? How can you help?
don't put procurement framework evil on me. I do not claim to be an expert in public sector frameworks, but predominantly we are on the vast majority, particularly this large CCS ones, NHS SBS, no CPC, lots more in councils, some specific ones for policing, for example. I do know we're present, but please don't ask me about the ins and outs of frameworks.
It's fine. No, sorry.
I'll
Put
avoid
you on the
that
spot
question like the
there.
plague, Peter.
Apologies. So look, that's pretty much the presentation wrapped up. Any questions? Please contact Elliott or myself. And there's some further reading there on our compliance white paper with CAF and a case study example. But from Elliott and myself, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.